Have you ever wondered if the historical events we're taught are merely sanitized shadows of a far more brutal reality? What if a single shocking act of defiance sparked a continent-wide bloodbath, an event so monstrous, so steeped in betrayal and hidden agendas, that its true horror has been deliberately obscured for centuries? Imagine a spring evening, the scent of jasmine heavy in the air, the chime of bells calling people to prayer, and then a single, agonizing scream that rips through the tranquility, igniting a fury that would consume an entire island, forever changing the course of European history. This isn't just a story of rebellion. It's a chilling saga of calculated cruelty, desperate vengeance, and the terrifying truth behind what happens when ordinary people are pushed to their absolute breaking point. What you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice, power, and the terrifying whispers of blood that echo through ages. For too long, historians have brushed over one of the most savage and pivotal uprisings in medieval Europe, the Sicilian Vespers. Dismissed as a near revolt against foreign tyranny, the true narrative is far more disturbing, a tapestry woven with threads of Machiavellian political conspiracy, a pope's unholy gambit, and the desperate, bloody struggle of a people stripped of their dignity. We're talking about an event so profound it reshaped kingdoms, yet its full horrifying scope, the sheer depths of human suffering and vengeful fury, remain largely untold. But what if I told you that the official accounts conveniently omit the chilling machinations of powerful figures, the whispered plots that brood in the shadows of European courts, and the systematic brutality that finally snapped the island's patience? The truth is far more insidious than you think, a story of calculated genocide and a people's terrifying, spontaneous retribution that still sends shivers down the spine. This isn't just history. It's a warning from the past about the true cost of unchecked power and the explosive force of human desperation. To truly grasp the inferno that erupted, we must first journey back to a world teetering on the brink of profound change, a land brimming with forgotten echoes and ancient grievances. Picture Sicily in the late 13th century. A jewel in the Mediterranean, a melting pot of cultures, Arab, Norman, Byzantine, a vibrant, prosperous kingdom under the benevolent rule of Emperor Frederick II. He was an enlightened monarch, a man who fostered art, science, and tolerance. But upon his death, a power vacuum emerged, and the rich prize of Sicily became the target of ambitious men. Enter Charles of Anjou, brother of the King of France, a man fueled by insatiable ambition and backed by the immense power of the papacy. The Pope, fearing a united Holy Roman Empire on Italy's doorstep, saw Charles as his champion, a strong hand to prise Sicily from the Hohenstaufen, grasp and place it firmly under Papal control. It was a holy war, disguised as a righteous crusade, but its true motive was pure geopolitical power play. And here's where it gets dark. Charles of Anjou, with papal blessing and French steel, swept into Sicily, conquering it with brutal efficiency. But his rule was not benevolent. It was a heavy hand of foreign oppression. The French, known as Angevins, treated Sicily not as a kingdom to be governed, but as conquered territory to be plundered. High taxes crippled the economy. French officials occupied every position of power, and their soldiers, arrogant and rapacious, considered the Sicilian people little more than serfs to be exploited. Imagine your harvests seized, your daughters dishonored, your homes invaded, all under the arrogant assumption of superior right. Imagine a foreign soldier demanding your last coin, laughing as your children starve. This wasn't just economic hardship. It was a systemic dehumanization, a daily assault on the very soul of a proud people. The Angevins were not merely rulers, they were tormentors, and their actions sowed the seeds of a terrifying harvest. The resentment simmered beneath the surface, a cauldron of anger waiting for a spark, waiting for the perfect catalyst to ignite a furious, vengeful conflagration. The atrocities committed by the Angevins were not random acts of violence. They were systematic, almost ritualistic degradations designed to break the spirit of the Sicilian people. French soldiers and administrators, emboldened by their king's distant approval and their own sense of racial superiority, treated Sicilians with utter contempt. They extorted exorbitant taxes, confiscating land and property without impunity. More horrifyingly, they routinely violated Sicilian women, often in front of their families, a grotesque demonstration of power that left indelible scars of shame and fury. Imagine the daily terror, the dread lurking in every shadow. Utter powerlessness as your loved ones are brutalized by men who see you as subhuman. One historian of the time, although likely biased, recounted the widespread belief that no woman was safe, no household inviolable. The Angevins, rather than seeking to integrate, deliberately fostered an atmosphere of fear and subjugation. They banned traditional Sicilian customs, suppressed local languages, and filled every administrative and ecclesiastical position with Frenchmen, alienating the native population entirely. They were effectively erasing Sicilian identity, replacing it with a French colonial boot heel. It wasn't just misrule, it was cultural erasure, a systematic campaign to break the will of a proud people. And the Pope, who had sanctioned Charles' conquest, remained silent, effectively condoning this reign of terror. This silence was not merely complicity, it was a chilling endorsement, revealing a papacy more concerned with temporal power than moral justice. The stage was set, not just for rebellion, but for an explosion of raw, untamed fury. The simmering cauldron of resentment and fear finally boiled over on Easter Monday, March 30th, 1282. In Palermo, at the Church of the Holy Spirit, just outside the city walls. The bells were ringing for Vespers, the evening prayer, drawing a crowd of Palermitans out for the festive occasion. It was a beautiful spring evening, the kind that promised renewal and peace. But peace was a cruel illusion. A group of French soldiers mingled among the crowd, drunk and boorish, their eyes scanning the women. One particularly obnoxious French sergeant, named Drouet, accosted a young Sicilian woman, a married noblewoman named Theodora, claiming he needed to search her for hidden weapons under her dress. His actions were a blatant, public violation, an insult designed to humiliate. Theodora's husband, a man named Roger, was present, and witnessing this egregious assault on his wife's honor, he snapped. In a flash of righteous rage, Roger seized Drouet's own sword and ran him through. Little did they know, this single desperate act of defiance would become the spark that ignited a roaring inferno, a wildfire of vengeance that swept across Sicily with breathtaking speed and terrifying brutality. The moment Drouet fell, a cry went up, not just of anger, but of long-suppressed fury. Mora, Mora! Death! Death! It wasn't just for Drouet, but for every Anjou soldier, every tax collector, every violator, oppressor, doctel. The crowd, driven by years of humiliation and suffering, surged forward. Within minutes, every Frenchman in the immediate vicinity was dead. The bells of Vespers, once a call to prayer, now became a chilling alarm, echoing across the city, signaling a massacre. As the bells tolled, the cry of Mora, Mora spread like a fever. What began as a spontaneous outburst quickly became an organized hunt. The rebels, many armed only with farm implements, kitchen knives, or whatever they could find, systematically searched for Frenchmen. They say the rebels used a chilling linguistic test. Anyone suspected of being French was made to pronounce the word ciciri, meaning chickpeas. The Sicilian dialect rendered the C sound with a soft sound, while the French tongue typically produced a harder sound. Those who failed the ciciri test were instantly executed. The streets of Palermo ran red with blood. Homes were ransacked, French families dragged out into the open. Mothers, children, priests, no one was spared. The savagery was extreme, born of years of pent-up hatred. What started in Palermo became a horrifying cascade, fueled by messengers spreading the news of the revolt. Town after town rose up, replicating the Palermo massacre. Within weeks, thousands of Angevins had been slaughtered across the island. One chronicler vividly described the scene. Not a single man of French blood remained alive, save for a few monks and friars who had lived in the island for many years and were known to be pious and innocent. The scale of the violence, the indiscriminate nature of the killings, the sheer, unbridled ferocity of the Sicilian people, shocked Europe. This wasn't just a revolution, it was an act of collective catharsis, a terrifying release of generations of simmering fury. The island had been silent under the French boot, but now it screamed with the roar of 1,000 vengeful lions, and the echoes of that scream would reverberate across the Mediterranean for decades. But the horror wasn't limited to the initial brutal uprising. The immediate aftermath revealed an even darker underbelly of political intrigue and desperate maneuvering. Charles of Anjou, utterly stunned by the uprising, was not a man to accept defeat. His pride wounded, his power challenged, he immediately vowed a campaign of total annihilation against the Sicilian rebels. He gathered a vast fleet and army, determined to drown the island in blood and reassert his dominance. What followed was a prolonged, brutal war that stretched on for decades, devastating Sicily and draining the resources of entire kingdoms. Charles, with the full backing of the Pope, preached a crusade against the Sicilians, branding them heretics and rebels against divine will. Imagine the terror of the Sicilians, having just thrown off one oppressor, now facing the wrath of arguably the most powerful monarch in Europe, sanctioned by God's own representative on earth. Yet, the Sicilians were not without their own champions, albeit ones with deeply selfish motives. Pedro III of Aragon, son-in-law of the late Manfred of Sicily, Frederick the son, saw in the Vespers an opportune moment to claim the island for himself. He had been quietly funding a shadowy network of Sicilian conspirators, working behind the scenes for years, sowing seeds of discontent and promising liberation. While the initial uprising was indeed spontaneous, the speed and effectiveness with which it spread, and the immediate appeal to Pedro, hint at a deeper, more calculated plot orchestrated by external forces. Was the spark in Palermo truly accidental? Or was it the final, carefully timed push from unseen hands, manipulating the desperate populace for their own imperial ambitions? The ciciri test, while seemingly a spontaneous act of cunning, could also be seen as a pre-planned method of identification, a dark echo of an organized extermination. This introduces a chilling layer of manipulation. Were the Sicilians truly masters of their own destiny in that moment? Or were they pawns in a grander, more sinister game of thrones? The true horror of the dark revelations continued long after the initial bloodshed. With Pedro III of Aragon's arrival and his subsequent coronation as King of Sicily, the island became the central battleground in a proxy war between the French and Aragonese crowns, with the papacy firmly on the side of Anjou. This wasn't merely a political squabble. It was a scorched earth conflict where the Sicilian people paid the ultimate price. Imagine continuous sieges, famine, disease, and the constant threat of invasion. Charles of Anjou's counterattack was relentless. He laid siege to Messina, one of Sicily's most important cities, for months. The inhabitants faced starvation, their resilience tested to its absolute limit, Yet they resisted with an almost superhuman resolve, knowing that surrender meant certain death and the reimposition of French tyranny. The Angevin forces committed new atrocities, designed to break the will of the besieged. Accounts describe mutilated bodies being thrown over city walls, psychological warfare designed to instill despair. But the Sicilians, now fighting for their very existence, hardened by their initial acts of vengeance, refused to yield. The War of the Vespers, as it came to be known, wasn't just a series of battles. It was a systematic dismemberment of Sicily. The island, once a prosperous hub, was ravaged, its fields left fallow, its cities scarred. For over 2 decades, the conflict raged, fueled by papal excommunications against Pedro and subsequent Aragonese rulers, transforming what began as a cry for freedom into a drawn-out, agonizing struggle for survival. The papacy, rather than condemning the atrocities of Charles of Anjou, actively supported his attempts to reconquer Sicily, even proclaiming a crusade of Aragon against Pedro, further legitimizing the slaughter of those who dared to defy papal-backed rule. This papal involvement casts a long, dark shadow, revealing how religious authority was weaponized to crush political dissent, regardless of the human cost. The sheer hypocrisy, the chilling abandonment of its flock for worldly power, is a forgotten betrayal that stains the annals of the Church. The Sicilians, in their fight for freedom, found themselves not only battling an earthly tyrant, but also excommunicated by the spiritual authority they had once revered. This betrayal of faith, coming from the very institution that preached peace and justice, would have been a psychological torment as devastating as any physical wound. The aftermath of the Sicilian Vespers was not a clear victory, but a lingering wound that bled for centuries, leaving indelible scars on the geopolitical landscape of Europe. The war formally ended in 1302 with the Peace of Caltabellata, but the true consequences were far more profound and insidious. Sicily was officially separated from the Kingdom of Naples, which remained under Angevin rule, creating 2 distinct kingdoms, the Kingdom of Sicily on the island and the Kingdom of Naples on the mainland. This political fracture had immense long-term implications, turning Sicily into a perennial pawn in European power struggles, often ruled by foreign powers, never fully regaining its former independence and prosperity. The island, once a beacon of cultural fusion and wealth, descended into relative poverty and marginalization, a shadow of its former self. But the hidden consequences stretch far beyond mere political borders. The Vespers cast a deep psychological shadow, creating a fierce, almost paranoid insularity. Among Sicilians, a deep distrust of foreign rule and external authority that arguably persists to this day. The memory of the ciciri test, the brutal massacres, and the papacy's betrayal forged a collective identity steeped in suspicion and a fierce, often violent, protectiveness of local autonomy. Could this deep-seated distrust and the culture of self-reliance, born from decades of brutal oppression and external manipulation, have contributed to the later rise of powerful, secretive organizations that operated outside the law, offering protection where the state failed? It's a provocative question, and one that serious historians continue to explore. The concept of omerta, the code of silence, might not have been born directly from the Vespers, but the conditions that fostered it, the profound alienation from the state, the belief that justice must be taken into one's own hands, were certainly cultivated in the bloody soil of the late 13th century. Furthermore, the Vespers dramatically altered the balance of power in the Mediterranean. It marked the decline of Angevin ambitions in Italy and the rise of Aragonese influence, paving the way for Spain's eventual dominance in the region for centuries to come. The papacy, too, learned a bitter lesson about overplaying its hand in temporal politics. though it would take centuries for that lesson to truly sink in. The very concept of nation and foreign occupier hardened in the fires of Sicily's revolt, setting a dangerous precedent for future nationalist uprisings across Europe. The horrific violence, often glossed over in textbooks, served as a chilling reminder of the primal forces that can be unleashed when oppression becomes intolerable. We see echoes of Chow, this desperate fury in subsequent rebellions, from the Jacquerie in France to countless peasant revolts. The Sicilian Vespers wasn't just a localized event, it was a blueprint for violent resistance, a terrifying testament to the destructive power of papal push too far, and a stark warning about the long bitter price paid by both the oppressors and the oppressed when humanity's darkest impulses are unleashed. But wait, there's one detail I haven't told you yet, a chilling historical footnote that reveals just how deeply ingrained the fear of such an uprising became. Decades later, when the Angevins still held Naples, it became a common, almost ritualistic practice for French families to ensure their children were taught to correctly pronounce Sicilian words, a dark subconscious memory of the ciciri test, hoping to avoid a similar fate should another wave of vengeance ever sweep through the land. The memory of the Vespers was not just history. It was a ghost that haunted generations. If this dark chapter of history shocked you, and if the whispers of blood from forgotten massacres compel you to seek out more hidden truths, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And comment below. I read every single comment and would love to hear your thoughts on this disturbing piece of history and what other buried secrets of the past you think we should unearth next.